All right.
We gotta get a better light here.
I think I'll start. I want to welcome you all. It's so good to see your faces this afternoon, and we really, appreciate you being here. We finally got some sun, so it was a good day. So I'm Julie Wake. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Julie Wake, the Executive Director of the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod. The Arts Foundation has been around since 1988. And our mission is to support, promote, and celebrate arts and culture on Cape Cod. We are so excited to kick off this 4-part lecture series called Modern Love, Conversations on Art and Architecture, which are 2 of my favorite topics. The goal of this series is to listen, look, discuss, and repeat. We want you to walk away learning something new, or with a new perspective, or maybe a new appreciation. I'd like to thank our Stand with the Arts sponsor, William Ravis Real Estate, for making this lecture series possible. And I'd also like to thank our business patrons who continue to support our work. And I see quite a few of you on the Zoom this afternoon, so thank you and welcome. And Amy.
Hi, everyone. So many of you, I recognize your faces, and a lot of you, I see your names, and you and I haven't had the opportunity to meet. So I'm Amy Tuttle, and I'm the Director of Development at the Arts Foundation. And I just wanted to take this opportunity, because it's so rare for me to be able to do this one-on-one, to just say thank you for your incredible support, especially last year. It really was an incredible journey for the Arts Foundation, and I'm so proud of the work that we were able to do. And we were able to do it because of the generosity from all of you to Stand with the Arts, which was our big year-end campaign, and also to support the Cape Cod Arts Relief Fund that we launched back in March to support local artists in our cultural organization. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so excited for tonight, and I'll hand it over.
So just a few quick points to make your experience a good one. Remain on mute throughout the discussion. Only our speaker will speak during this event, so please do not unmute yourself unless we unmute you or maybe we ask you to clarify a question. The discussion will be recorded and replayed on Provincetown TV and will also live on our website and our YouTube channel. We'd love to see your beautiful faces, so turn your video on. However, please do what is comfortable for you. It's not mandatory. For the best viewing experience, select speaker view or gallery view, and you can select your viewing preference on the upper right corner of your screen. If you have lots of windows open or other things running on your computer, I'm always guilty of this. Now is a really good time to close them and avoid any bandwidth issues. Hold questions for the end. But when something comes to mind, feel free to use the chat box to share your questions or comments anytime during this presentation. And if you are experiencing technical difficulties, you can send me a direct message via the chat and I'll try to help you, but no promises. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon. Mike Carroll is a curator, a gallerist, and an artist. He attended Emerson College and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Mike was involved in Boston's then thriving underground scene. He ran live performances in the video section at the Boston Film Video Foundation when video was in its black and white reel infancy. He opened his first gallery, the 11th Hour, in the early 1980s, where he produced exhibitions and events by members of the Boston School. He was the executive director at Provincetown's Schoolhouse Center from 1997 to 2004, and in 2005 became the owner of the Schoolhouse Gallery, where he is well known for presenting the finest in contemporary art. Mike works with industry professionals to curate and present fine art in professional spaces and advises on collections management. Mike is a member of the board of directors of 20 Summers and sits on the advisory board of the Fine Arts Work Center. He writes and speaks on making, studio practices, and exhibition spaces. please welcome Mike Carroll.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amy and Julie, and to the Arts Foundation especially, and for everyone who's here. Thanks for being here and welcome. We're going to have a conversation about contemporary art on Cape Cod, and I'm going to try and keep it conversational. And I think what I'll do is just begin by adding a little bit to my own biographical information, just because that's really the lens of the experience that I can bring to you today. And just, it was well covered, but I just want to, sort of add that I have a practice as an artist that's, that started when I was a very young person, and I trained in art classes and art schools and art studios. And in fact, my experience in Provincetown was very much about kind of reclaiming the studio legs that I had become distracted from as like a young, wild 20-year-old person. I had gone off and had that kind of a, rambunctious late teenage, early 20s kind of life and lifestyle. And I came to Provincetown really quite specifically to try and reclaim my studio practice, to try to get my studio legs back. I've been fortunate enough to always have a true north that was about making. And I've never felt satisfied unless in some way that was being addressed or was in my scope somehow, and it's, it's alternately frustrating to other people in your life. Many of you probably know this. And also really, I have been, I think, a most fortunate individual because I've been given the gift of really quite often realizing that I'm living my own right life story. And once in a while, I even feel like I'm on the right page, So I will say that one of the experiences I had in Provincetown when I was attempting to get back to my artwork was a unedited, unfettered endorsement from everyone that I knew. The entire community, collectively and individually, said, that's exactly what you should be doing. There was a total endorsement for beginning or beginning again, making. There was the space for it. There was permission. Go see this person, go do that, try this material. All of that really was a big part of my experience. And, Provincetown itself, which is where I lived at that time, is not an easy place to live. So the support felt great, And, after a couple of years, it was quite hard to do it. I was very distracted by other things, and I was quite hard to claim my own practice back, but I did. And I kind of said to myself, well, now you've done that, you've kind of got your legs back. And I felt as though I could continue on a daily basis in a good studio practice. And I thought, well, I really ought to get out of here. I should really leave Cape Cod, because at that time I said, pretty soon I'll be 40 and really old and not have any money because there's no economy here. And I've got to go back to the city and sort of get my act together. And at that very minute, literally at that moment, somebody from the Schoolhouse Center called me and said, we're opening an art center, and would you like to come and take a look? Maybe you'd like to apply for a job. And I said, no, I don't think so. I have this plan, even though it was fairly half-baked. And I thought, but I came and looked, and I was instantly hooked. The Schoolhouse Center at that time was being opened beautifully by a very generous patron named Howard Davis, who rehabbed the building and opened a for-profit art center that he sponsored for many years. And then I became the owner. So that's the only reason I said that is because I've had feedback over the years from artists that I work with who tell me that it's comforting to have a gallery person in their studio who also is familiar with what it's like to have a maker's practice. And I think that also establishes something that I would just want to talk a little bit about today, which is the idea of oscillation. For me, that this place that I'm in right now, the Schoolhouse Gallery, and my own personal making practice, my own personal painting practice, have been oscillating primarily seasonally for 25 years now, and I think we're all fairly familiar with that, with that notion. So just to get started talking a little bit about contemporary art, I thought it would be wise to visit sort of the definition and ideas about this school of thought that came before contemporary art, which is modern art, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with. But I just wanted to sort of remind us that, modern art is generally considered to have occurred before contemporary art, maybe from the mid 1800s to about 1950 or 60, something like that. And how I want to speak about it is to say that it was a period where artists were responding to the introduction of mechanical reproduction and new ideas about industry and distribution that had come post-industrial revolution. I love Walter Benjamin's essay about art in the age of mechanical reproduction and the idea about aura changing, the experience of looking at an individual piece of art and having a response that's aura based, that may even be spiritual, and that's certainly physical and hopefully intellectual. And how during the period that modern art was happening, all of that was getting reorganized. And some say that there was a loss of this aura-based experience, and others say that aura was begun to be distributed to communities of thought, to social architectures, to groups of people, rather than remaining an individual experience. Although we still have to go to, we're still interested, I think, in getting together when we can again and going to look at an individual artwork. And I certainly remember standing in the Metropolitan Museum in New York in front of a massive Cy Twombly painting when I was much younger, and actually having the experience of my knees knocking together. It just was unbelievable. Every cell in my body was vibrating, and so I think that modern artists were dealing with that and asking questions from within the studio, from within the existing definitions of what a painting was and is, what a sculpture was and is. So, but they were saying, gee, can we make different kind of mark making systems? Can we, reorganize the viewer's point of view? Can we reorganize the artist's point of view? How can we play with this? And if any of you saw in the New York Times, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, they did this really cool examination of a George Braque collage, just piece by piece, and talked about, the introduction of sort of everyday materials into the fine art world, as being fairly radical for the time, and sort of not having been considered then. And I think that there's an equivalent there to a discussion about how society and economy was reorganizing itself at that time as well. So, just to mention that a little bit about that movement, because I really feel like, in my observation and with the people that I've worked with and know, a lot of people operate from that point of view on the Cape. We're very influenced in Provincetown, certainly by the great teachers, the great painting teachers and their students. Many of Hans Hofmann's students are the senior teachers on the Outer Cape today. So there's an extension of that line of thinking, the atelier kind of line of thinking. And then we get to, the period of contemporary art, maybe 1950 to 1970, 80, something like that right now, where, as someone who's sort of part of that generation, what I observed during that time was that artists began to sort of be like, the studio shifted from an individual experience to a collective experience. I became interested in a number of artists who would pick up an idea and sort of maybe identify an inspiration and make a piece of art from that position, but they would then put it out for the next artist to pick up and move with. And so, I would be influenced by a piece of art history and a piece of political news, and I would make a combine of an idea, for example, and I would make a piece of art and I would put it up, and then I would fully expect another artist from the studio down the block to pick up my idea and add a chapter. So it began to open up the conversation to a sort of wider social architectures, and it became contextualized. And I think that's part of why contemporary art is so hard to define, because there's so many things that make contemporary art contemporary. There's so many possibilities for it, and there's so many ways to talk and think about it. And that's why we see fascinations with things like persona and ephemera and other aspects of art, the deconstruction of painting in the 90s. These sorts of things were considerations and parts of discussions, but never really, much to critics and writers' chagrin, they never really took over a movement and became a definable force. But it did continue to open up, the dialogue about what contemporary art could be, what art could be in general, and who could participate. And it started to sort of dissemble the boundaries between traditional studios and the rest of society, And now I think that for young artists today, if you think about, today as kind of the most contemporary moment, I think that young artists today have inherited a world that is sort of on the one hand, completely free from those sorts of boundaries and conventions that even earlier contemporary artists were asking about and challenging. But also there's a sort of an inclusion of activism and outrage in the art world today that are challenging whatever conventions and definitions remain, So it's such an interesting time. I think that partially young artists feel as though they've inherited an unfair situation. And there's a kind of a voice of, as I said, a voice of outrage and a real challenge. And they're working in such a way where viewers are implicated in the artwork, where there's an expectation that you are not a separate viewer, you don't have discretion, there's no fourth wall, and they're working with ideas of multiple authorship, multiple ownership. I just remember reading in one of the controversial articles about the Whitney and these kind of institutional scandals that have happened over the past couple of years. One of the artists that had been criticized by a critic in a piece of writing wrote back to the critic and said, "You can't even criticize my work because you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. You don't even have a relationship to my own sources or the people I know or what we're thinking." So that sort of distance right there is just an amazing moment. It's very challenging. It results in artists who have artworks on walls of institutions feeling they also have the right to discuss who's on the board and, the financial sources. And it's a very challenging thing. And it also brings up, I think, for people, the nature of activism and if activism is a skilled place or if it's a de-skilled place, and if just the voice of outrage without mastery can operate with value to create better social architectures. People just don't know that yet, I don't think, or I certainly don't. Anyway, but I wanted to just give you one example of an artist that I like who's working this way. And this is, maybe you could show that one picture. This is an artist named Paul Sepoya. And he's not a Cape artist. He's actually from Los Angeles, but he was in a show on Cape Cod that I saw last summer. I've known about the work. He's a photographer. We don't, if you can't get the picture, it's fine, but he's a photographer and he really works in this way, which is everything about the picture is not discussing the picture, but everything about the picture includes the construction of the photograph. It's not this picture that we're looking at. It's kind of the first one, but maybe we can get back to it. There you go. So this is one of Paul's pictures, and Paul works in this sort of boundaryless environment where the photographic studio is very open. He takes pictures with his models and subjects. How the picture is constructed is revealed in the picture itself. And he does this. One of the reasons I like this work is because it's very gentle, loving work as well. They're sensual, there's nudity and things like that. Sometimes they get sexual, but more they're really very kind, really gentle pictures, and in doing so, the way that he implicates the viewer is by an invitation, a soft desire to know more about what's going on. So you feel almost as though you can't not participate in these pictures, or in fact that you are in some way by the nature of the fact that you're looking and he knew that this would be happening. The way that self-consciousness is located in the pictures is exactly right. It's got the eyedropper amount of self-consciousness and form is perfect. And again, the gentleness and the kindness of it. So if you get a chance, I think he's a great artist to look at as someone who's just working in this way right now. And the value of photography in the whole, I don't know how carefully he chose a camera to work with, or if this is something that he loved and got good at, but the value of the camera and the photographer in reorganizing contemporary art is, kind of, I think really the most important thing is still camera and films. And, photography is the art form that for us took down the wall between photography and fashion, took down the wall between photography and architecture, took down the wall between, street photography and formal portrait photography. It collapsed and reorganized public and private spaces and created a sense of ownership for viewers. And this is the world that Paul is working in, and except that they're just so sweet, so it's kind of nice to do that. So, so a little bit about then contemporary art on Cape Cod. In my experience, which is really, I think, the best thing obviously to talk about, I think I've seen most of the artists that I've encountered over my 25 years in the gallery anyway, are operating in one of two ways, or maybe a little of both in some cases. One is, sort of as a continuation of this atelier system, where, they're referring to the great teachers, maybe in Provincetown, Hans Hofmann and Henry Henchy and these sorts of teachers. But I think really more deeply, they're kind of referring to people like Charles Peale and Alexander von Humboldt and these early American explorers that were even, oh God, I can't remember his name, but and even a couple of like Frederick Church and Bierstadt, who was, the one who went out and recorded the Western Territories for Congress. I love this guy. Like he went out and he was sent before photography to paint the Western Territories so that Congress could see what they were claiming. But he made everybody, you might know this, but he lied in the paintings, like he would go over 4 days and he would see different kinds of animals and species that would have killed each other if they were near each other, but he would paint them all in the same painting because it saved time. And I think there's a really cool connection between that kind of approximation and how people think about like approximate mark making and sort of summary of information in artwork today. Anyway, these guys, I think they held a belief that to be a good citizen of the world, one investigated the place where art and science and nature intersect. And there was enlightenment and good citizenship to be found in this place. And I think that's a big part of Cape Cod. Actually, I think a lot of people that I know have that sort of value on humility, and they also have that desire for good citizenship. We're pretty good politicians out here, and I think that, we care about each other. It always feels like home, no matter where you go, all of that stuff. So I think there are a lot of people that are really operating that way, a desire to have a relationship to place, or to render place, or explain the joy of your interior experience, your internal experience of being in a place like this, And then the other people that I've dealt with and known sort of start from a similar place where they're really maybe say if they're making a painting, they're making a material response to these beautiful elemental circumstances. But along the way, they want you to know what their inspiration was and what they've done about it. So if they're making a painting, it could be of a subject or a story, it could be non-objective, it could be abstract, but they care that you know what got them started, and they care that they want you to know that it concerns them and they believe in the painting. And they'll give you almost, the painting can almost be like a diary of their experience. There's evidence, like through burnishing, repaintings, reconsiderations. You can even sense it sometimes, people's influences in the art, these sorts of things. I think those people kind of start in maybe a modern position, but usually at some point, there's a contemporary interjection. At some point, something shifts and opens, and some contemporary thinking comes into the painting. It could be, a lot of sculptors do this, where they'll take a familiar material and alter it once. They'll take an object and alter the scale once. There's some contemporary kind of interjection into the work, which becomes a doorway for the viewer. And I think that's not strictly contemporary artwork, but I believe in what I have observed is that most Cape artists kind of oscillate between these two positions. So, you know, it's this principle of oscillation again, where they're kind of really care about the soul of their practice and the poetry of their practice, but they also were also regularly visited by some of the most exciting contemporary thinking in the world. You know, we have great, in the summer, in the seasons, we have, you know, this really great amount of excitement, of sensuality, of intellectual, you know, kind of fervor, and just this injection, and all many different kinds of economies, great wealth, a service class, great poverty. All of these things are like the tossed salad of our experience, you know. And so I find that a lot of artists will start with these pretty traditional sets of materials, and at some point they're making that interjection. They can't help it. They're bringing something contemporary to it. Alteration in scale, something added to the surface that changes the viewer's point of view, you know, some interjection like that. And I think that really what makes that contemporary is that what changes at that moment, you know. So you're acknowledging the viewer, you know, you're sort of bringing into play what I think happens when this oscillation that we experience on the Cape really begins to vibrate, which is that the artworks turn from what they are into how they exist. So when you think about not only what an artwork is or what it's made of, but how it exists for people and in time and in space, whether it's in a gallery, whether it's outside, how it's discovered, how much of a shared experience it is versus an individual experience, you know, whether or not there's aura or industry, or whether or not those two things might be vibrating back and forth. I think that really is the contemporary moment that I see on Cape Cod. You know, this idea of something not only existing well for its own physical properties, but becoming something based on how it exists in society, material culture, and in the social architectures that surround the object, if it's an object, you know. So that's really kind of the point that I wanted to make today. And then I think what I'll do is just quickly talk about a couple of pieces of art just as examples of that, if everybody's still okay. I hope I'm not like boring you to death, but I have a piece of art behind me here that I'll walk over to a little bit. And this is by an artist named Lauren Ewing. And this, I think, is a really great example of what I'm talking about. Whoops, how do you do this? What I'm talking about with someone who makes a contemporary interjection into a fairly traditional picture. You know, this is actually a photograph. It's a photographic substrate, I should say. And what Lauren has done is she has taken an idea about photography and an idea about printmaking, and she's made a combine. The impetus for her work in this case is that she has a fascination with how light changed society and culture. So there's a picture actually of the little houses that I can talk about. So Lauren, a lot of Lauren's work is about how illumination changed architecture. So we had a show here where she did, I think it was 20 types of houses. So her contention is that when people began to burn things, coal, for example, and began to have fires in homes or caves, then dwellings changed from something that was about shelter and protection to something that could be more. You could have a room that was dedicated as a kitchen. You could have a room that was dedicated as a library. You could live differently. Your indoor life became something more than survival. So a lot of her work considers how illumination changed, how illumination changed society. And so if you have that picture of the little houses, maybe you can put that up and we can show this whole series in the little pictures. There you go. So these are called common houses. And so you can see that Lauren made a version of types of houses that were not illuminated and showed them next to a version of types of houses that were illuminated. And her contention is that when people began to use fire, they also began to see reflections in polished glass or on polished metal. And there began to be a discussion about value that was closely associated with luxury and light. So a lot of her work considers luxury, light, and different value systems. And this particular picture behind me, which you can also see on the wall there, talks about that. This is very much, so what she's done is she's taken a picture of a forest, which is the picture behind it. And then she's taken a picture of a Venetian chandelier, which is the picture in front of it, the chandelier shape in front of it. And she has printed that chandelier with coal dust. So she's masked the print and then added coal dust to the surface. So it actually kind of shimmers along. So she's choosing her materials directly as a source that explains the idea in a material way. So she used coal dust because it's what was burning, what was making the illumination happen in the first place. And she's laying it over a natural space. So she's sort of explaining diagrammatically in the work what the work is about. So we can maybe go back to my screen and I'll show the picture again if you can. So for Lauren, this is a picture, it's a photograph. It's easy to see it's a photograph, but her contemporary interjection is to connect materials to explain the idea. And in fact, the sort of the picture becomes an explanation of what the picture is. There's a kind of a meta factor to it. And then I think just for time, I'll just do one more instead, which is that other picture by Lauren, which is the one with the red hat. So this picture is called Imagination in the Fold. And Lauren is a sculptor. So it's important to note that because probably many of you recognize that this is a Van Eyck self-portrait. It's a very well-known self-portrait that's considered to be either of him or his grandfather, I think. So Lauren has painted, but she decided she wanted to do this project about matching artworks from different periods in art history. This is a Mondrian. There's also a Van Eyck. There's also a Malevich and a Richter and a Klein that she did 4 series of these. But she took 2 years to learn to paint this Van Eyck portrait like Van Eyck painted it, with very, like 2 and 3 hair brushes and lots of glazing and all this kind of stuff. But the thing that I want you to know about this painting, which I think is so fascinating and sort of what makes it contemporary in terms of how it exists, is that for her, it actually is a sculpture. So in her view, and this is kind of what I want to leave you with, because I love this thought, in her view, the community of makers, and I believe the community of makers on Cape Cod, as our world, are, really, I don't know how you could say, they're sort of more than essential to, material culture, society in general, all kinds of societies in a larger sense. We're essential workers, right? And so every once in a while, we need to rejuvenate ourselves. So what Lauren did is she took these 2 pictures from art history. They explain some other things that she's interested in, like as we talked about before, she's interested in value and value systems and luxury. And so she became very interested in these hats, which are called chaperones, which are really useless hats. They don't keep you warm. You can't walk through a doorway in them. You bend over, they fall off, but they were indicators of style and status. So they were forms that carried information but not really in a permanent way. Depending upon who stood in front of you when you had a chaperone on your head, the message was a little bit different. This particular chaperone is a double thick wool, which meant that Van Eyck's patron had very good sheep and was a wealthy person. And, there's a flattery to the patron kind of thing happening there. So she's got a lot of coded messaging in the work. But really to her, this is not a flat painting. To her, this is actually a dimensional experience. And what she told me about this is she said, Michael, I believe that creative people are essential to the world, and what we bring to the world is magical. She said, I also believe that we periodically get burnt out and need to go somewhere to rejuvenate ourselves. And so she said, I believe that these two pictures from art history have met, and below them, there's a fold. And that fabric is where we all go to find each other and to find further inspiration from each other. So this piece is called Imagination and the Fold. And the fold is the part that you can't see, which is theoretically where these two paintings have met. So I'm just going to leave you with that one and hope that you guys have some questions, because even though that's a little hard to imagine, I thought it was such a great message to artists and art and makers in general, because it's such a thoughtful, warm, such a thoughtful, loving way to think about other people that you make art with or that you like to look at art with, so, okay.
Thanks, Mike. I want to put it out to the group if there are any questions. And Mike, I'm not sure you can see the chat, but somebody said, it's always a pleasure to stroll through Schoolhouse Gallery.
Oh, nice, thanks.
Yeah, the art influences my selection of music for my programs on WOMR. Thank you.
Yeah, our great neighbor upstairs, yeah.
That's cool. Another one, thank you for bringing up these important points about the role of institutions from your earlier remarks.
Yeah.
And does anybody have any? Feel free to take yourself off mute too. If you have a long, if you have a question that you're like, ugh, I don't want to, if you could just put like maybe your hand up or something like that. In the meantime, I'll ask a question about, you and I were talking about this the other day when we were preparing, about what does the gallery system, how does the gallery system work?
Yeah. Well, I think that does, if you think about that point about, how does contemporary art exist? Like, how does a piece of art exist as well, as well as what it might be physically? The gallery system kind of steps right in there, because it's really a place where art can be seen. I kind of have to love the gallery system, even though it's a very unpleasant system in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I've seen it really be an unhealthy experience for artists, and it's very sad that way. But it also, it is also a place, and I think here on Cape Cod, I think it's a meaningful place for people because it's, we're so close to each other physically, like we're down the street from each other. You really want to kind of have a neighborly talk about this and see what's possible. So it's, and on the Cape, outside of the institutions, which are actually all mostly very accessible to, we really are conversational with each other. The galleries, they're small businesses. They're not that different than a working studio, and in fact, I think that kind of the reason you see these quirky gallerists with their architectural glasses all kind of quivering in the corner when you come in to ask them about your work is because they care so much about what they do, and they're so kind of aware of the risks and aware of the trepidations of being in a small business in a seasonal place, and they're afraid that they're not going to be able to edit how much they love what you're doing. I think is really a lot of it, in a way. But so one of the things I do like about galleries, and one of the things I think is a good function of galleries right now, is with our culture becoming so transactional and I think it's really good for people to know this, at least about how I think about galleries. With our culture becoming so transactional, I think it's great that galleries, are kind of freer spaces than many other kinds of retail spaces that you can go in. Like if you come into this gallery, you don't have to leave and you don't have to buy anything. The value here is looking. The experience is looking, and feedback is welcome. Like that's really the most highly valued thing about it, and if I went to a clothing store and I stayed for 45 minutes and sat down on the floor and looked at everything, I would be asked to leave. Like it's not, so there's a, they're thought of as places that are about money and moneyed kinds of places, but in fact, there aren't very many spaces like that you can actually feel really free to go. And that's why I really hate when galleries feel imposing. I just can't stand that. I think it's really the wrong approach to looking at art, but that is a thing, I often get people who come in here and say, is it okay if I'm here? Or do I have to pay? Or, it's just this expectation of propriety that, ought not to be in place, I think, and, as I said, they also, they deal with real estate and expectations, which are the two of the most corrupting things in human life. Like basically it's competition for real estate, and it's a whole bunch of expectations and rewards and disappointments. So you just so have to be focused on the process and practice of the artist, or you will get lost in the really the rotten stuff of it, But luckily here we have seasons to rejuvenate. We have a little fold to go in and come back from,
Mike, I have another question. With this past year of COVID, do you think there will be an impact on modern art, particularly on the Cape?
Yes, I do. I think because of that injection that we get, and I'm not saying that we depend on an injection from other people to get new ideas, but I think that we get that. It's like a real advantage, to meet. The thing about Cape Cod is that anyone can be in front of your picture, or anyone can be in your audience. It's just the world comes to us. It's such a fortunate experience, So there always is this kind of rejuvenation and this kind of retossing of the salad here every year, and I think that right now, because so much art that's being made right now is really includes the space that it's in, the people that see it. It's not just only experiential, kind of stadium sized experiential pieces, but it really is meant to be that the viewer is, as I said, either implicated or invited to be a participant. And I think we're just waiting for it to be warmer. Basically, I think that's really, we just have to wait until it's a little warmer for that, But I do think that, all the new materials that are available, are going to be available to us. We hold tradition in place for people, and we're always inviting something new,
I'm gonna skip to this one because I know we have some photographers on the call. Talk about how photography is migrating toward the mobile phone. Everyone can photograph quickly. How does this fit with your definition of the twist that contemporary art depends on? What becomes the gallery for digital photography?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Yeah, really good question. I think that if you look at kind of the decade-long trends that we've lived with in contemporary art, if you look at, say, for example, Cindy Sherman and fascination with persona after identity, persona. If you look at what was maybe a decade-long fascination with ephemera and support materials that made artist studios happen or exhibitions happen, all of these sorts of things, if there's a different toothbrush, if there's a different paintbrush every couple of years that artists use as a new tool, I think that the singularly most important tool that people are learning to use right now is distribution. I think we know people, young people particularly, that are as satisfied with 10,000 Instagram hits as they are with a sale. And, that may be impossible to understand for some people, because it feels in some way like, what do I do if I'm not thinking about sustainability? Like what's that world? I don't get that, so there are real challenges. And, photography is, I love photography so much, and I love dealing with photographers. They're like the perfect mix to me of like wacky creatives and science guys, because they have to know all that, both sides of the world. But, photography is very hard because every single time a new tool is developed for photography, at the same time it's developed, it's completely democratized. Anyone can try it. It's accessible to everybody. So the thing that is always most important in photography is the photographer. The photographer is your avatar. The photographer has taken a chance on your behalf. They have gone to a place for you, ahead of you. You must trust them. You must believe in the position of the camera. You must believe in the choice of the subject or the moment. You must understand the light as a physical experience that can be digested without words. And that, I don't know how that's going to play out really digital stuff. I know that, like, I work with Amy Arbus, and she made a body of work on her iPhone 2 years ago. She's a wet darkroom photographer, like, period, and she made a body of work. She was trying to do like a Paul Strand thing on these homeless people in Washington Square Park, near where she lives in the city. And she couldn't do it with a camera. They wouldn't let her photograph her. So she tried this iPad, and she was able to get the shots, and she was satisfied with the prints. They're not the same, obviously, but I think it just, as a photographer, I think it's something to do with whether or not you remain tethered to uh, you know like wet darkroom photography as a definition of legacy. Photography is a legacy sport. You are taking the picture after the person that took it before you, and in front of the picture, the person that's going to take it after you. That's why it's so important who the photographer is. But if that does mean that you want to, stay close to original methods and materials, then I think that's a good choice. Certainly it's a very different experience to be looking at thousands of images in a single day, which is what we all do regularly all the time now. It's just, that's the idea about aura being distributed completely. We're really globally kind of experiencing the degree of aura that people used to desire from an individual experience of looking at one painting. So it does feel like it's watered down quite a bit, by that just boom, 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 boom of images,
Yeah. I'm gonna we're getting close to our time, unfortunately, but I'm gonna give you one more question from one of my favorite contemporary artists here on the Cape, Jackie DeRider. I like how you described artists deriving inspiration from each other and adding chapters to each other's work. This must be much different now than it was 40 to 50 years ago because of technology and how we communicate and share art and ideas. Can you comment on this? Is this degree of sharing still generally acceptable?
I think this is a great question. Hi, Jackie. I think it's the idea of stealing an original idea is different now. I think that really, whether or not you think that's a good or a bad thing, I think that everything is up for grabs all the time. It's a very chaotic, kind of disordered way to look at material culture and society in general. It's quite disturbing, but it's funny that as I said, people have become quite a bit more not people, but societies have become quite a bit more transactional. Like, certainly the United States is very focused on that way of doing things. But this idea about ownership of originality, where's that gone? So I think that we're so far beyond the moment where collaboration became something. I think collaboration has become something that's so accessible, it's so acceptable that it's not even a discussion anymore. This is this idea again about multiple authorship and shared experience. I'm not sure you can really steal an idea, except if you know you did it. Right. I mean, I had to, I had to do a painting once years ago. I lived in this shoebox of an apartment with this tiny little bedroom, and I had this painting on the wall where I slept. And so I looked at it, 14 hours a day, and I was like, I got to paint that painting, or I'm never going to paint another painting of my own again. So in that case, I painted, basically, I didn't repaint the painting, but I painted something like it, and I just never showed it to anybody, because I thought I have to get this out of my system. It's killing me, But yeah, obviously, I think the answer to that is if it's acceptable to you, it's acceptable. And then there's a great thing about editing your work, whether or not your work remains personal to you. If it's acceptable in general, I would say not yes as an endorsement, but yes, really, we're in a time where really anything goes. And I think the most interesting things are the spectrum of our experience. People are on gender spectrums and, all kinds of, I view this period in art making for young people as a completely disembodied experience. They are disembodied in what we were comfortable at in my generation as knowing as personal space. They're very uncomfortable in a larger society because they don't really feel safe a lot. I think they've been trained that things are not safe around them, but they have a different way of sharing information and a different set of boundaries. So I don't know that anybody sharing an idea in that construct would consider whether or not they would need to ask that question. So it's a very interesting question though. And I think, of course, with somebody like Jackie, she's going to paint her way through it, because she's amazing. Yeah.
Well, we are at our time. And Mike, I just want to say thank you for your time. I know that you are super busy jet setting and curating and making. And we really appreciate, this conversation. It's definitely given us a lot to think about and take away. So I want to thank you for that. You're getting some thank yous here. We'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody with a list of places to go see contemporary art, such as the PAM, the Cahoon Museum of American Art. Don't let the name fool you. Sarah Johnson, who I think is on the Zoom right now, has done an amazing job introducing new artists and ideas to that museum that museum has never seen before. And it's amazing to go in there. And also the Cape Cod Museum of Art in Dennis. So there's lots to see here, as well as the galleries and the Schoolhouse Gallery. You can go visit Mike down there. And our next lecture will be a month from now on March 25th at 5 p.m. And we'll be talking with Peter McMahon from the Modern House Trust about modern marvels. So I hope that we will see you then. And for now, I hope everybody stays well. And thanks, Mike. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
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 Bye. Very interesting discussion.
Oh, I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad you liked it. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much. See you next month.
Great.